Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to rise today in report stage to review Bill C-63. I lament that we have time allocation in place, and I'm grateful that I was able to grab the slot that occurs every 34 slots for someone in a position such as myself in a party with fewer than 12 MPs. Time allocation tends to be and is, in fact, a real detriment to the principle that all MPs in this place are equal. That is the principle of Westminster parliamentary democracy. And, of course, the increased power of party whips, the increased partisanship within the House means that all MPs are equal in the way that George Orwell described all animals as being equal in Animal Farm. Some are more equal than others. And the rules around recognized parties, I'll just pause parenthetically to share with my colleagues that I only recently discovered that Canada is the only Westminster parliamentary democracy that has the notion that you need a certain number of MPs before you get the same rights as all your colleagues. It's unique to Canada. It's replicated in our provinces and something I would like to see removed someday. In the meantime, Madam Speaker, this bill has already made history. It's the first time that the new rules for parliamentary procedure around omnibus bills have been applied. I certainly appreciate the fact that the Speaker accepted to look at this and separate out those sections that did not appear to be required to be within the same theme of action. Omnibus budget bills became, I'd have to say, well, absolutely horrific in the Harper era. The omnibus budget bills in 2012, and we had two of them, C-38 and C-45, had nothing to do with budgets and were omnibus bills of the most egregious kind. And so the term omnibus budget bill became in the public mind something to be absolutely rejected and condemned. But there is such a thing as a legitimate omnibus bill, and there is such a thing as a legitimate omnibus budget bill. This one came close, but there were those sections that I appreciate the Speaker separating out. For the most part, and this is something I wanted to have a chance to say, I think the debate in this place has been misplaced in tending to be from the opposition benches primarily about the Minister of Finance's personal finances. Minister of Finance's personal finances. I really think that we need answers to those questions, but not in the context of a debate on Bill C-63. I think Bill 63 has much in it that I would urge other colleagues to read closely, because I have read this bill closely, and there's much in this bill that I like. I certainly want to support, although it didn't go far enough, the bill does take some steps towards something that the government promised. As a matter of fact, the government promised to remove fossil fuel subsidies when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister at the 2009 G20 summit. So the promise has been on the books for some time that Canada will eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. It is in that sense a government promise that's not strictly a Liberal promise. But it is also a Liberal promise, and it was made in the platform and in the speech from the throne. And we've seen very little done at the federal level to eliminate subsidies to fossil fuels. The accelerated capital cost allowance for oil sands investments was tapering off under the previous Conservative government. It remains in place for existing projects that are grandfathered under this, a very advantageous tax regime that continues to amount to about $1 billion a year for oil sands companies, but it was once closer to $3 billion a year. So that's people debate over what's a subsidy and what isn't, but as a capital cost allowance, it's seen as a pretty advantageous tax treatment that amounts to a subsidy. The one that's, by the way, the other one that has not been touched at all by the Liberals was one that Stephen Harper brought in after he pledged to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. And that's the subsidy towards the production of natural gas, and particularly assisting liquefied natural gas companies go ahead. It's hard to beat the one that former Premier of BC, Christy Clark, left in place for the wood fibre LNG plant, which will amount to about $4,000 in public subsidies for every job created. So we're still subsidizing fossil fuels provincially. We're still subsidizing fossil fuels federally. But what this bill does in Part 1, which I was pleased to see, although it doesn't go far enough, is that on oil and gas drilling, if you have an unsuccessful oil and gas drilling experience, you used to get 100% write-off. That's now reduced under Bill C-63 to a 30% write-off. That tax treatment is better. It's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough. The other piece in that same section that certainly is encouraging is that we're seeing better tax treatment for a real winner in renewable energy, which is geothermal energy. We've known for a long time that we can do a lot with geothermal. We certainly have seen countries around the world benefit from geothermal, and this is for the very good new tax treatment to encourage geothermal electricity. There's also improvements here for the donation of ecologically sensitive land. I was part of the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy back in the day when the member for Ottawa South was the CEO. We took a real fight on there to try to convince the then Minister of Finance, Paul Martin, not to treat the donation of ecologically sensitive land as something that actually penalized the donor. People used to get dinged with a deemed capital gain when they didn't actually get anything. They were making a donation. So over time, our tax code has moved consistently in the direction of better treatment. This bill, C-63, expands the kinds of lands that can be donated and improves the tax treatment. So again, the ecologically sensitive land donations are quite welcome. I also want to support the improvements in the tax treatment of nurse practitioners so that they'll have some of the same tax treatment of other health professionals, which improves how their lives will be day to day. Similarly, in Division 10 of Part 5, there are also improvements to how the Energy Efficiency Act will operate. We definitely want to see more energy efficiency programming. It's been a large disappointment to me. The Minister of Finance knows this. I mentioned it to him recently. But a very large-scale disappointment to me is that we are not using the tools in the federal toolkit to approach climate change as if we take it seriously. If we could go back and look at the current Minister of Public Safety's budget when he was Minister of Finance from 2005 and pull all those measures out and decide they're a top priority for this government to put in the 2018 budget, I would be one happy camper, because that would include eco-energy retrofits, which we don't have. It would include supports for electric and hybrid vehicles, improvement on the east-west electricity grid. Well, those are the things we don't have in this budget, but at least what we have in Bill C-63 are amendments to facilitate a lot of energy products to include harmonization of regulations, enhance energy efficiency. Those are very welcome. Now, what I tried to change the most in committee through amendments was to improve something which is essentially, again, generally positive, a step in the right direction, to give people the right to time off work if they or members of their family have been victims of violence. That's it's obvious to anyone who thinks about it, and if you've gone through it yourself, or you have friends who have, if you've been the victim of a violent assault, if someone in your family, particularly a child, has been the victim of a violent assault, that takes time. If you're going to get that child to therapy appointments, if you're going to get yourself to therapy appointments, if you're going to take time to recover from the trauma, and it's a trauma, you need time off work. It's very much welcomed that this legislation will give, by right, employees time off work. But the bill operates in such a way that the employer has the option to say you're not allowed to take less than a full day. So you can't just say, I want a couple of hours, that's all I need. You have to take the full day. And this is time off work without pay. And so I still would hope, I'm very disappointed that my amendments didn't get through in committee to say this time off work should be time with pay. Now, the evidence we had was overwhelming in committee, certainly from Hassan Youssef as president of the Canadian Labour Congress, saying that, as he pointed out, 90% of domestic violence survivors experience financial control issues. If you're a spouse who's been violently assaulted by your spouse, and one spouse is the breadwinner, let's put gender to this. In most cases, it's the male partner who violently assaults his wife. And the wife is in, generally speaking, a reduced financial situation of independence compared to her husband. How do you manage if taking time off work actually means you might lose your right to raise your own children because of the financial duress? These are the parts I would have liked to have seen fixed.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. Honorable député de Hull-Elmer.
Honourable Member for Hull-Elmer.
First of all, I'd like to thank the leader of the Green Party for not only her speech today, but with many parts I certainly agree with, but also her work when she has attended Finance Committee, of which I'm a member. The question which I have to the honourable member, it's in regard to some of the tax treatment changes which are part of Bill 163, the Budget Implementation Act, Part 2. One of the elements which the member had mentioned is in regard to the changes regarding geothermal energy and the tax treatment of that. I was wondering if I can give the opportunity to the honourable member to talk a little bit more about the measures, some of the changes that she also wanted to bring to that, and how in future budgets that she would look for future changes in that regard.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Highlands.
Thank you for those points, and thank you for your kind words about my work on the Finance Committee. The geothermal regulations are found in a couple of places, primarily at Section 104, Sub 1, in allowing the recovery equipment and to be used in the process of both energy efficiency, conserving energy, and also producing energy. Geothermal has tremendous potential. A lot of the reports that the Public Utilities Commission in British Columbia has issued, for instance, to the BC Hydro, has been to say, look at that potential. The potential is enormous. People tend to think that it's, if you haven't looked at it much, that it's kind of very specific geographically, like to Reykjavik to Iceland, where they have geysers, and it's clear they get their energy from geothermal. But geothermal is adaptable to most every region of Canada. You can put you can tap geothermal energy to warm a house in almost every part of Canada, but certainly below the tree line you can. And there are also huge potentials for large-scale production of geothermal energy. So in the suite of renewable energy options, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and tidal, Canada is abundant. When Stephen Harper used to talk about Canada as an energy superpower, that's where our superpowers lie. In installing that equipment that you never have to buy fuel again. Once you have solar capacity, once you have wind capacity, once you have geothermal, once you have tidal, you're not buying fuel to run your energy producing equipment. It's there for free. You just have to invest in it.
And comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague from the Green Party for her speech. We don't hear enough talking about these alternative methods, for example, geothermal heating and other methods that can be very superior, particularly in winter in Canada. Another subject we don't hear much about in the House is the Canada Labour Code. I heard her talking about different types of leave, so does she not think it's a problem that the government didn't respect the Harder report that proposed 10 days of leave for family issues, and there's only 3 in the bill. So does she think that that's something that could be improved?
Honourable member for Saanich Gulf Highlands.
Oui, absolument.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with my colleague, the member for Longueuil, because for families, in times like these, you have to have access to financial support for those days when the family is not working. Without that support, it's very difficult to have access to time off.
Clear that when you're in these situations, if it's an opportunity you can't use, it's not really an opportunity.